Just a quick warning, this podcast series contains discussions about crime, trauma, sexual abuse, drug use and suicide. Listener discretion is advised. Former 1% Motorcycle Club member, published author turned social worker. Justin Mooch Deloretto, welcome to the Stick Up, brother.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, man. I'm excited to come on.
Hey, tell me about, your upbringing and where it all started for you.
So I come from just a middle-class Italian family out here in the United States, from the capital of Oregon, Salem. And most of my family are like school teachers and sports coaches. So, I had a really loving, caring family, a lot of aunts and uncles, that type of traditional Italian family where we do, Sunday dinner, or Sundays had, family dinners all the time, and then all the birthdays and all that stuff. So, upbringing was really good. I was really cared for. And then, one of the caveats to that too is I'm an identical twin brother. So no matter where we went, like family vacations or trips or whatever, I always had somebody with me. So that was always really cool. And I think that carried with me quite a bit through my life as well, is always having someone there with me through these different experiences.
It's important, but we'll talk further about it. But by the sounds of it, you're really validated at home from a young age. Would it be fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of one of the misconceptions about people that get into gang life or club life or stuff like that, is that they're searching for family. And I know obviously there's people out there that are, for sure, but that just wasn't the case with me. I mean, I had everything I needed as far as that was concerned at home.
Yeah. Let's talk about school. How was school and that sort of stuff for you?
Not bad. Grade school and stuff. I played all the sports there was, since my family were like sports coaches and stuff. I pretty much played all the different sports. Really got into wrestling pretty early on, and so that's what I stuck with through junior high and high school. Was on a bunch of different mat clubs, wrestled quite a bit. So I played. I stayed pretty active with sports and different athletic stuff. And I would say, because I was in sports teams and stuff, kind of always had friends. It was relatively popular. In high school, I got into like the punk rock and skinhead scene and stuff, and so I was kind of the nerd at school for that stuff early on. But that was like maybe freshman, sophomore year. And then I started kind of making more friends and starting to build a reputation for myself. And honestly, that's probably when I started getting in trouble too, because I started getting a reputation for fighting quite a bit. And I noticed that, instead of getting picked on, people were either fearing me or respecting me, one or the other. And so I really kind of jumped into that. And so I was really getting in a lot of trouble in high school. But I did well, like with grades and everything. Like, I was successful in school and I did well. Now I have a master's degree, but I didn't go back to college until I was like 27 or 28 years old. So after high school, I didn't jump straight to college.
I really like to backtrack and find out why kids get into trouble. Statistically, you're validated at home. And one of the big stats here in Australia are that kids that are involved in sports and team sports, and their parents and their family are involved in it with them, drops their chances by about 30 or 40% of ever getting in trouble, because they're validated,
Absolutely.
They're supported and that sort of stuff, Let's talk about when you started to get into trouble. You started by fighting and that sort of thing. What was going on for you there?
Well, and just to kind of backtrack with what you said there, now I'm a mental health therapist, but I work with teens that are on parole probation, and I do what we call multi-systemic therapy. So we look at what's driving certain behaviors and then how we can, develop interventions to actually stop these behaviors before they happen, instead of like, how are you feeling? What's going into it? And one of the biggest things youth studies will find is that getting youth, especially teenagers, involved in pro-social activities such as sports or clubs and stuff like that does definitely, increase the chances of success and keep them out of trouble, because they're hanging out with positive peer groups. They're being monitored more. They're learning a lot as far as the sports and how to work with others. So yeah, that definitely backs up a lot of those studies that you've heard. And I definitely learned that a lot later on in life, for sure.
And it gives them structure too. And I think, you guys would have the same. We've got really big problems here with youth crime. And unfortunately, these kids are coming from dysfunctional families, and it's intergenerational transference. They've got traumatized parents creating traumatized kids.
Absolutely.
Without any validation. Kids it's not safe for these kids to be at home. It's safer on the streets for them. So it's interesting, Matt. I really want to I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on youth crime and some of the, things we can do to minimise it. Let's just go on. So let's talk about, when did the gang life sort of start for you?
Right around high school time is when I really got into the skinhead scene. The anti-racist skinhead scene. I was into punk rock and stuff like that. And when I started in high school, there was a group of neo-Nazi skinheads called Volksfront. and they kind of were bullying me because I was wearing Dead Kennedy shirts and these bands that were traditional anti-racist.
Mm.
And they kept calling me a sharp, which I didn't know what that was, but it stands for Skinhead Against Racial Prejudice. And this is pre-internet era, so anything I learned from books or asking around. So I started reading all the books I could about the old school traditional skinhead scene, and it was really gang oriented in my area. So, the older guys, there was about 4 or 5 other skinhead gangs in the bigger city of Portland, and they established one gang and kicked the rest of them out. So it was pretty territorial. It was pretty violent. And from that, I started hanging out with those guys and kind of, seeing those were my friends. I started fitting in. So I started kind of emulating what they were doing.
Mm.
And then, like I said, too, I think another big piece to it, too, is I'm an identical twin. So I think at that point in my life, I was really searching for identity. So
Yeah.
having something to belong to represent, to feel a part of was really big for me. And I definitely believe that played a big role into that. So, just kind of trying to build that macho reputation of tough guy and had tough friends. And so I think I just kind of dove headfirst into that.
What sort of path did your twin brother take? Which way did he go?
He's pretty much done everything I've done.
Uh,
It took him a little bit longer to get into like that punk rock and skinhead scene, but he ended up getting involved too. And then we both kind of moved into motorcycling together around the same time. And then I started prospecting for a local club in Portland before he did, but then after that he did, and then we ended up joining clubs together. So he's done a lot of the same stuff I've done.
Can you talk about the process of prospecting? What's that entail?
Yeah, I mean it's different from club to club. The club that I prospected for was a club called the Outsiders, or like a really old school club in Portland. Um, and essentially, I mean, it kind of depends on how you want to look at it. The Outsiders ran it really old school. So your goal is to A, get everyone to get to know you, right, and then B, to get to know the club, get to know the lifestyle. Is this a good fit for you? Is this something that you could keep up with? And then while you're doing it, you're learning the protocol, you're learning security, you're learning the traditions and history of the club, the protocol of the club, all their rules and bylaws. Some clubs kind of treat it more like fraternal, and it seems like there's like hazing and that type of stuff. Any club I was in, or at least when I was more in charge of that stuff, we try to make it more of a learning experience. Is this something that we're teaching a potential brother? Are they learning from it? And what's the best possible outcome? And we don't want someone that'd be willing to get talked down to or treated poorly and then want to call that person a brother later. Plus, I think it really undermines that brotherhood process and caring for the people that you're with. So the biggest part is just it's about learning. And most clubs it's like 6 months to a year, some are more than that. But you're pretty much at the club's beck and call. And even if it's not for being a gopher, like running cigarettes or drinks, a lot of times it's for doing security, holding up the back of the pack, standing around outside watching the bikes, keep an eye on the clubhouse, those types of things. And so when I was doing it in Portland, I worked a job from like 7 to 3, and then at 3 I'd go check into the clubhouse, make sure it was clean and the bar was stocked, and then members would start coming in after work, and I'd be there until they sent me home. And so some nights I was home decent, and sometimes I was there super late at night and was up and going back to work. So it's kind of a challenge as far as the time and the process it takes, but every club does it a little different.
I'll tell you something now, and I say this, I've been to I still am a friend of many clubs in Australia. What they've done to the outlaw bikie scene in Australia, they treat bikies in this country worse than pedophiles. They got all of these laws. It's just draconian. The strict draconian what they do, and it's crazy. They got all these laws where they can run into an outlaw bikie's house without a warrant. They can raid it. They can tell him he can't associate and that sort of thing. I've seen a fair few friends that join the clubs that give them structure, and it kept them out of trouble.
Absolutely. That was a big thing for us too, is, especially growing up in the gang world and fighting a lot and getting in street fights. Once you put a patch on, it draws a lot of attention to you. And if you're doing something, often your brothers are there doing it for you or doing it with you. So if I'm out getting in bar fights, I'm making a bad look on the club, I'm getting other people arrested, I'm risking myself getting arrested, I'm risking injury to others. If people are out selling drugs and they get caught, it's making the whole club look bad. So in reality, the structure and the rules of the club should be a positive influence on people's lives. It should help them straighten up and stay out of trouble. I think the Australia stuff, a lot of it is for show, right? I think a lot of the studies have shown that it hasn't changed criminal statistics at all.
No.
It might have been overcrowding some of the jails and prison systems, but there's no, there's no recovery or anything like that in that process. And I think it's shown it really hasn't had much impact on crime. I just think that motorcycle clubs are visible, right? They wear a patch, they go out in big packs, and so they're an easy target for politicians and for law enforcement, because everyone can say, "Oh, I've seen them," or I see them out and about. So, they build this narrative that they're, the mob on wheels, and Joe Citizen doesn't know the difference. So they're going to go with what they're told. So it's easy to buy into, I think.
And 75% of the crime rate, the bikie-associated crime in Australia is traffic-related. And it gives the inference that it's like it's drug related and that sort of stuff. You know what I mean? It's crazy what they do. But you ask them to get the breakdown. So what is it? Is it drugs? Is it assault or anything like that? And it comes back to being traffic. So they mislead the public over it. What happens here is mate. And you know what? They've got them same laws, and they won't apply them to sex offenders.
It's crazy.
They need
it's
a
absolutely
bad guy.
crazy how they do it.
That's crazy. Tell me about the process of club, man, because, people are, I think, with the advent of the Sons of Anarchy, people have got this worldwide fascination of what goes on at a bike, what goes on in a club. What's the average day like when you're a fully patched member? What's an average day look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, majority of people that join motorcycle clubs join because we love motorcycles. So a lot of what goes into it is working on our bikes, riding bikes, planning runs and rides together, big long trips. A lot of partying going, we'd go out and whether it's a campground or a hotel or several bars, but we go out and just, ride from spot to spot and have a good time with our close friends. And, the kind of outsider perspective more is we like to stick to ourselves. But I mean, the day to day pretty much is just talking, staying there for your brothers and being in touch with your brothers and hang out and spending time with each other. As club life progressed for me and I became in a position of leadership, I kind of, tried to make it a more positive. And so we started having stuff where like every member had to work out at least 3 days a week. We had to all hang out and spend time with each other at least 1 day a week. A lot of times we were lifting or training together, doing jujitsu together and stuff like that. So just building that brotherhood outside of the bar is a big part of it too.
And that's that structure. I got a 20 going on 23-year-old, and the kid thinks he's Tupac. You know what I mean? And I've had a few clubs because he's a good fighter. This kid, he's got a big name on the Gold Coast in particular as a fighter. And I've had a few clubs, and man, I've considered it. Like, they've said, "Oh, we'd love to sign a young bloke up," and I've said to him, "You need structure." And I think, I know people on the outside that don't know the life would say that's poor parenting, but I would recommend it to him. He's a kid that it's either military or a bike club.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't think it's much different than the military, which is why so many, military members end up joining motorcycle clubs afterwards, is for that structure. There's a lot of accountability to it. You got to learn to be a man of your word and follow through with what you say, that your actions have consequences. So there's a lot of follow through. I mean, there's a lot of really positive things you can learn from that lifestyle. The biggest thing, I mean, it's different when you're younger, right? Because you're pretty impressionable. But as you get older, the biggest thing is just setting your boundaries and what you're willing to do and not willing to do. And honestly, if you're just a man and you stand up for yourself, you really shouldn't be putting yourself at risk for criminal activity outside of the crazy laws you guys have over there. But you really can be an active club member and not really risk, jail or prison, like they used to say. The old adage was death or jail. You join a motorcycle club, you're going to get killed or go to prison. And I've always believed that if that was the case, why would I want my friends to join? And how could I call you my brother if I want you to lose your wife and kids and go to prison? And so having those positive outlets have played a big role as well.
Tradesmen in clubs that wouldn't steal a kiss.
Right.
I've seen that. I remember working on a building site, and these laws come out, and he goes, "Man, I'm a tradie. Here I am working, and they don't want me to be around my brothers. They don't want me to be a part." Because I work in the field. I've got an organisation that helps survivors of institutional sexual abuse get compensation. I've got 21,000 clients at the moment. I work with 42 different law firms. And some of my clients are in clubs, and they said, we found that safe place. We found, a place where people believe us, that people have got our backs, and that, you know what I mean? And that's not too uncommon. Like people that, you're blessed that you had that functionality, but a lot of them do come from that dysfunctionality, and they find that place, man. Talk us about some of the people that you encountered that come from some real, because you would have seen trauma firsthand, you know what I mean? Some serious trauma firsthand. And talk us about that and how them sort of people are welcomed into the club when people know their stories.
Well, and I think, a big part of that, just like military or stuff like that, is when you're spending stressful time with somebody or whether it be a long motorcycle trip or, being together during police harassment or potentially having issues with other clubs. If you're going through traumatic experiences with others, it's the closest we can get to each other. I mean, that's when bonds are really formed. That's when we really get to know each other. That's when those, the stories that we laugh about later or tell the younger kids about later, those are all formed in those rough situations. And generally people that have that trauma history are pretty good at navigating tough situations. I mean, they're and then when you meet other people that have similar backgrounds or that have also gone through different trauma stuff, and that, I guess one of the misconceptions is this whole masculine culture, but in reality, close brothers can talk about anything. So there's numerous late nights, opening up and talking about things, or, hey, I love you, brother, I'm here for you, anything you need. And so having that support system and that structure is huge. And for not only survivors of trauma, but just being in club life in general.
You just touched on something there, and you said something that every young person or some person that's been through trauma and that needs to hear. I love you, brother. I'm here for you. So important. And it's like, and you're building someone who can run through anything. And I have catch up with my mate who's a national president of a club over here all the time, and one of his rules he's brought to the club: if you play up in your wife, you can't be loyal to your brother.
Yeah, I like that one too. And I mean, there's a lot that goes to that. And that was, some of the things that I kind of learned as I went on as well is it's the same for what kind of employee are they? Are they always a victim? Are they always in trouble? Or are they a hard worker that they care about their name and the reputation? Because that's the person that's going to be a good member as well. Yeah. And that's the same. You have, they're loyal to their old lady or those types of things, because loyalty is a huge part in this world. And so is honesty. And if you're disloyal or dishonest in one circle, how are we supposed to believe you're going to be like that in our circle? But, one of the kind of funny things to it too is, I'm a mental health therapist. So I'm a counselor. And so, here we are at church with all these alpha male tough guys, and I'm asking about how they're feeling and supporting each other. And, we're grown men, tough guys openly talking about their feelings, but it goes a long way too. And it makes you really care about one another, and the fact that you have someone there with you through anything, that's a big part of it. And I think that's a big draw to a lot of people.
I'll tell you what, as a young fella, I went to prison when I was 16. They put me in an adult prison when I was 16. They housed me with the worst pedophiles in Australia at the time, and I was sexually abused while I was there. But coming out of there, that would have been the perfect fit for me, because I would have felt safe there. I used to, in the old days, you could go to clubhouse on a Friday night, and it was the best part. And I'll tell you who was safe. Women and children were safe in them places.
Yeah, I mean, a guest should always be safe, right? I mean, and there's numerous ways to look at it, but first of all, if you're a guest at a clubhouse, you're somebody's friend, so you should be treated well anyways, especially women and children. And then the other part too is a lot of these clubs back then, at least, were selling drinks or having raffles or whatever. And the more women that come to the parties, the more guys are going to show up, and it's going to be a good time. So treating guests respectfully and definitely treating the women with respect goes a long way. And that's another kind of unwritten rule, or I guess it's probably actually a written rule in a lot of clubs, but it's another rule in most clubs too, that you can't mess with another brother's old lady, or even you even ask permission if the brothers talked to the girl before. So there's a lot of that structure that's built off of respect, and it's not just respecting the brother, it's respecting the brother's family, the old lady, everybody involved, because it's really that family atmosphere. If the old lady's not happy, he's probably not going to be a good member. So it's keeping everybody happy and feeling like they're a part of something.
Mate, really well said what you're saying. Tell us about, man, because, you see these runs, and I've often seen big groups of bikes when in the day and they're taken off, you get 40 or 50. Man, that looks like so much fun.
It's wild, man. When I first started getting into motorcycles, I'd ride around with 4 or 5 of my friends, and I thought that was incredible, right? I felt like a Viking out there on the road, 6 of us. And then as club life progressed, when we started the Mongols in Oregon, there were 6 of us. And so that was a big pack for me. And then one of the biggest packs we had in Oregon was about 90 something motorcycles. And, it takes several minutes for the whole pack to go by. And then out here in Missouri and Illinois, we've had some packs that were almost 200 motorcycles strong, or down in California, riding with the main part of the club, the Mongols out there, several hundred in the pack. And it's just a feeling you can't be beat. It's insane. Can't see the front, can't see the back, people all around you. I mean, it's a wild and exhilarating experience.
Going for, I tell you, I had one of the boys pick me up. There was about 10 of them once, and we went through the city at about 2:00 in the morning, and the sound of the bikes bouncing off them, that is something that everyone should expect. That is just like, wow.
Yeah, it can't be beat, man. It's really unexplainable until you've done it, and then it's something that you crave moving forward because it's such a cool experience.
Talk about when you're on a ride like that, you go you ride off. Bike scene in America is a lot better than, obviously it's a bit more unregulated than it is over here. They've just brought these draconian laws on. But talk about what happens when you turn up in a town.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on the town and the event, right? Some of these big bike, like say Daytona, or some of those more popular ones you hear about, for the most part, they treat bikers really well because that's where their income comes from.
Yeah.
And they know that from the tourist stuff. Now, as they've gotten more popular and, the different laws for club stuff here too, some of them become no colors allowed. You're not allowed to wear your patches in the area and stuff, but a lot of them you still can. The times it's a trip is like we did a club run to southern Utah, which is it was a pretty desolate area. And it was a 2-day ride to get there from Oregon. So we're stopping at these little podunk gas stations and, diners along the way, 30, 40 Mongols deep. Those are always the cool experiences because those small town people are always willing to come up and talk and ask you what's going on. They have a different impression than like the city people or the people that are used to bikers showing up. So to them, it's a huge deal, right? It's like the talk of the town. 100 bikes just came through town. And so, making those connections and meeting people in that experience is always really cool. And just kind of that feeling of you pull up into the town with, 50 or 60 bikes. The challenge could be, depending on where it's at, is law enforcement, right? If you've got a big pack coming to a new area, they instantly, sound the alarm and treat you like you're there to commit crimes. And next thing you know, everyone's handcuffed and getting searched and everything like that. So, it's kind of a catch-22, but overall, it's always a really good time, especially riding through areas we haven't been through before, checking out new spots, stuff like that. It's been really cool.
And it's good for the economy. One of the boys, my mate was on a national run in Italy, and he was at the lead, and some woman was on the side trying to get money for charity. And mate, he goes, by the time all the bikes went through, she was good for us. Someone would have been doing an armed robbery on her and gotten a good earn out of her. Like, what I mean? He
Right.
said it would have been. He said honestly, she would have got 20 grand out of them boys. You know what I mean?
We did one in a little place called Boulder, Nevada, right outside of Vegas. And the law enforcement made it this big deal, right? It was all over the news that hundreds of bikers were coming from, they're going to ruin the town and all this stuff. But when the news media and then the comment section, of the newspaper and stuff, the locals loved it. I mean, the amount of money that the club brought there for 3 days of business from, shopping all the local places, eating there, all the local liquor stores and convenience stores and stuff, the money brought in from hotels. I mean, it pumped so much money into that local economy. And then obviously when clubs go out to stuff like this isn't the 1960s. It's not the stuff in movies where they go up and they break down all the bars. We want to be welcomed back, right?
Yeah.
You want to be able to go into a town, and when we leave, people say, man, those guys were great. They were respectful. They treated everyone well. And so there's, like you said before, there's usually a lot less crime involved because you're in town. Law enforcement's too busy writing tickets, but outside of that, no one's committing any major crime. Everyone's respectful, and we're just spending a lot of money in the town. So it really should be a benefit and is a benefit. The unfortunate part is, the government and law enforcement try and spin it in a different way.
Always. It's fucking. And over here, they've got this thing, we're winning the war on drugs. Man, that war was you're never in that war. You're never in it.
Yeah.
But they try to sell it to us all the time. And it's like, okay, well, go and tell that to the parents of a kid who just lost their son to heroin. No, you're winning the war on drugs. And
I don't think anyone won the war on drugs.
No, they were never in it. But my friend, he's a national president of a club over here, and the coppers knocked on his door and he goes, how come there's no ice dealers in this area since you've moved in? You know what I mean? Because they've all taken off, and they've got a policy in their club that you can't deal with methamphetamine. We call it ice here, but methamphetamine,
Yeah.
What sort of policies do you guys have about that, like, in your club?
So when Little Dave took over from the club, which I joined in 2007, and then Little Dave took over around 2009, we had those big raids in 2008, Operation Black Rain. There were some undercover agents in the club, and a lot of people were arrested. And there was some members doing illegal activity. And so we tried to change a lot of that stuff. And so the first big change is that everyone had to have a visible mean of income. So a 9 to 5, or, something along those lines, whether it's be retirement or whatever. Because like I said before, if the guy in my chapter is getting busted for selling drugs and it's in the paper, everyone's going to assume we're all selling drugs. So it's kind of a bad look for everybody. And then, like I said, when I got into leadership positions, I oversaw a lot of the Northwest and then later the Midwest and a lot of the out of country chapters. And we had a no meth rule. I can't say, I'd love to say that was a national rule, but it was mainly in my regions. But there was a no meth rule. All of the clubs pretty much have a no heroin rule, no shooting drug rule. But even snorting, I had a no meth rule. And my biggest thing was, listen, if you want to party on the weekends, it's not, if you're still showing up to work, you're paying your bills, and you're upholding your obligations. I don't care whether your drug of choice is alcohol or maybe a little bit of coke. I don't care.
Yeah.
But if it's interfering with the type of member you are or the way you're living your life, then we will step in. And the Mongols have a clean and sober chapter called Pasadena, California. They actually run a rehab center that brothers can get treatment for free. So you can get drug and alcohol treatment if there's an issue. So a lot of things like that. And again, it goes back to us saying where it's a positive influence on people's lives. We wanted people to say when they join the club that the Mongols or whatever club you join, it made you a better person, not that your life went downhill and you ruined it.
Talk us about you. You talked about leadership. What is your title within the club?
Well, I'm out in bad standings now. I retired, and then a couple months later, my status got changed. But I started in Oregon in 2007. I started the very first chapter in Oregon, so I was a chapter president. Around 2010, I was brought into the club's mother chapter, so I oversaw. Well, at first I was just kind of a soldier, and then I developed a support club program called the Raiders. It was already in place in Oklahoma, but I kind of changed and developed it so that it could spread. And there's chapters in Australia now,
With the
Thailand, all
Raiders.
around the.
I'll get pulled out. I wear a Raiders hat. I love Raiders hats. I'm a hat wearer. I went and over in Perth, some bloke pulled me up and goes, "Are you?" I said, "Am I what?" And they said, "Are you?" And I said, "I don't know what the fuck you're talking about."
Yeah, it was a trip. So I was wanting to kind of do a support club thing in Oregon, and was speaking with Little Dave about it and come up with some ideas. And what we didn't want to be like how a lot of the other clubs, and no disrespect to them, but a lot of the other clubs have 20 different support clubs or 100 different support clubs.
Yeah.
We just wanted to have one. And so one already existed called the Raiders in Oklahoma, but they were just there was actually one guy left when I kind of took it over. But we built it in a way where they have to be accountable to local Mongol chapters. And so it was really structured. It's ran a lot the same as the Mongols. They spend a lot of time together and do a lot of things together. And it ended up, the way we structured it ended up being really successful and growing around the world. So I was in charge of that. I helped start all the Australian chapters from some relationships I had with another club back then. So I helped start that chapter. And then I just kind of oversaw some of the out-of-country chapters until right around the time I retired.
I see, especially in Perth with the Mongols, they've got a lot of Sudanese in there. And what they do over there, man, like the boss over there is a mate of mine, there's no, because they talk about, we've got problems with African gangs over here. These kids were born in Australia, but they're of African descent. But they can colour it in and call them African gangs. They're actually Australians, right?
Right.
And but it sounds better in the news. We call them African gangs, and a lot of them have joined the club. And all of a sudden, there's no problem with African gang crime. It's crazy, and they get that structure and everything like that. Now they're Mongols, that's if they get in trouble, they're not African. They'd prefer to call them something, like bikies, and it's crazy. Talk about, I've always had this fascination with blokes coming out of the military joining clubs. What happens there?
I think, like we talked about, a lot of it's the structure, right? If you're in the military, you're used to the command structure. You're also used to, if you are in leadership, being responsible for the lives of other people, for keeping everyone tight, for following the rules. So a lot of people, it's all these guys join the military and it's that attitude of, I'm a man, I don't answer to other people, but the structure is different, right? And you're doing it for a bigger reason. And so a lot of the military is, you're doing something for the greater good. It's for something that's beneficial to the group, not just yourself. And I think all of that translates over to the motorcycle world. And especially, I wasn't in the military, so I can't speak to that. But from what I hear is, the guys that see combat or have gone through rough situations together, find another group of guys that, like I said, whether it's long motorcycle trips or, the unfortunate times where there's issues with other clubs, but we go through rough times together too. So there's always kind of that, the adrenaline rush, appeal is there, but then the fact that you're still following orders and structure and you're a part of something bigger than yourself. So, what you do affects everyone around you. I think those draw a lot of same parallels to the military. So I think it's a really good fit.
And normally those blokes bring something else to the club themselves. Like when it becomes like, if you get the special forces guys and everything like that, they bring another level of physical training.
Absolutely. And that's what I was saying earlier too, is, years ago, when I was kind of remodeling a lot of my areas, doing the no meth rule and stuff, one thing I noticed is, a lot of the times we were spending together was at like the clubhouse or the bar. And I really wanted to start having some more positive influence on each other, or getting to know people outside of that bar vibe. And so we had a rule in our regions that everyone had to work out at least 3 days a week. And whether that was martial arts or lifting weights, whatever you're into. But I noticed a lot of times we started doing those things together, and that built that separate level or that second level of closeness, that brotherhood. There was times where the Oregon clubhouse, we'd had wrestling mats down, and we'd do jujitsu before or after class or after church, or one of the guys would bring mitts and teach the other guys how to box, or we do a lot of, special forces like the stick and knife fighting and stuff like that. So, they could teach brothers stuff that they brought, they learned in the military, and they could teach it, but it's also just stuff for us to enjoy and share together.
You're talking, and you're a mental health worker, so you would know the benefits of exercise on someone's mental health.
Yeah. And that's what I used to tell the region, because we would vote on it, and there was always, some of the older guys or some of the guys that were out of shape would always kind of push back about, why do I have to work out? But really, I would ever tell them is tell me one reason you can't. Tell me one negative to a rule of working out, and there isn't one, right? There's it's absolutely all positives for between mental health and then spending time with each other and just staying physically active. Plus, it goes a long way too when you're running a strict club on tight security and protocol, and everyone's in shape and can handle themselves. I mean, it plays a big role, and it's really important. So I don't see a downside to having people work out in that style.
Yeah,
Well, in any lifestyle, but for that one for sure.
For me, I've got post-traumatic stress, and I think the best way for me to address that on a regular basis is I train 2 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week. I don't have days off, you know what I mean? And I think the importance of that, and I stress to anyone listening that's going through any of that mental health stuff, get to the gym, do something, get moving, get walking. You mentioned the word church. Can you explain the terminology church? I know what it means, but can you explain to the listeners what church means?
Yeah, that's what we call our weekly meetings. And if it, the rumor, or I guess the history of it is that back in the day they would tell the wives or the old ladies, hey, I'm going to church. But that's just what we call our weekly meetings. I think every club's probably similar in the fact that they do it most of the time it's weekly, but the Mongols was minimum or mandatory once a week. Everyone had to get together for our weekly meetings. It's where we would discuss like upcoming runs, events that we're hosting, all that type of stuff. And so yeah, it's called church. And I think it's funny because I've been in that lifestyle for so long that I forget that
Yeah.
it's not what it sounds like. And sometimes I've had people go, oh my gosh, that Mooch goes to church.
He's a what sort of church does he go to? Hey,
Right.
you're an academic, right? So where does that sort of play into? Like, were you still in the club when you started studying, or what was the deal?
Absolutely. Yeah. In 2008, I picked up some charges for chasing some cops. Some people were trespassing on my property, the very short version of it.
Mm.
I chased them. They turned out to be federal agents. So they arrested me for conspiracy to commit kidnapping and attempted kidnapping. So I sat in jail and I fought it. I took it to a jury trial and I won. But part of what I did lose is some of the misdemeanors, reckless endangerment, reckless driving. And so they put me on, a felony gang probation. So I wasn't allowed to affiliate with the club, wasn't allowed to have any active role in the club. And I did, right? I still stayed active. And so I kept getting caught and going back to jail over and over, a couple months at a time for affiliating. And there was, at one point, I'd walked out of jail and I'd actually gone into the jail and a corrections officer there had said, hey man, I lost a bet. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, I bet the other guys you wouldn't be back here because you're not like the people in here. And nothing against people that have done time. A lot of us have. But, I was looking around at these guys. A lot of them had drug problems or, different gang life stuff or whatever. And I didn't see myself. To me, I wasn't breaking any real law, right? I was hanging out at the club. Like I wasn't out doing illegal activities. And I needed to break that cycle. I was tired of going in and out of jail all the time. And so I was trying to figure out something meaningful I could do with my life. I got a felony charge at 18. And like I said, most of my family were teachers. And with the felony, I couldn't be a teacher. So was looking into something I could do still in that profession. And there were some Mongols that I know. One of them has he's a clinical psychiatrist. He has a PhD in clinical
Mongol,
psychology.
yeah, fair. That breaks the stereotype, doesn't it?
Yeah, and there's several guys with professional careers and academic careers and stuff like that. And so a couple of them were two of them were professors in psychology at different colleges, and then one had his PhD. And he was doing a lot of drug and alcohol counseling and working with inmates and trying to help against recidivism. And so I really liked a lot of that stuff. And so I figured he has more tattoos than me. The guy looks like a straight up gangster. He is a gangster. And I'm, I mean that in the biker term. He's not out doing illegal stuff, but a tough guy and a respectable man. And I figured if he could do it, I should try it. So at first, my initial goal was just to go to school for 2 years to get my drug and alcohol counseling degree. But within those 2 years, I really fell in love with psychology. So then I got my bachelor's degree in psychology, and then I got my master's degree in social work. And I started out, I was still a Mongol this whole time. And in fact, one of my internships was supposed to be at the youth authority there in Oregon. And they gave me like an address for the training, and I was hired as an intern, and I showed up to the training, and the training was at the Oregon Police Academy. So you can imagine how well that went over. I was there for about half a day before I got kicked out. But I ended up suing the state for discrimination because they said I was fired for being a Mongol, which isn't against the law, and I won. And it wasn't like a big monetary win, but it was the principle, and we was trying to establish some case law in the area. And so I won that, but then, I was trying to figure out, well, they're not going to hire me for an actual job now, right? So,
but did you get him reinstated? Could you go back after you won?
No,
could you go back to the company?
They would just it was an unpaid internship, and so they could just say yes or no. There was like the only thing that screwed them is that they openly said, hey, this is because you're a Mongol. If they would have just said, hey, it's not a good fit, or we're not looking for any other interns, it would have been fine. But they openly said that was why. And part of it too is my earlier crimes were against law enforcement, and you know how that goes. And so
Yeah, yeah.
those so-called victims of my crime were actively involved, following what I do and what I was up to, and we're trying to throw a wrench in that pretty often. But once I got into the field, I started with doing domestic violence counseling. So I work with perpetrators of domestic violence and teach them, for lack of a better term, kind of a more feminist perspective. And that was really meaningful, and I really enjoyed that a lot. I did do some substance abuse counseling, but it didn't really click with me. I didn't really care much for it. Not that I don't like the work, but most of those people are court ordered. They don't want to be there, and so I didn't see a lot of meaningful change. And then I moved into multi-systemic therapy, which I was telling you about before, where the client is actually the youth. So it's teenagers from 12 to 17 that are at risk of being placed out of the home, going to juvenile academy, or being kicked out of school. And we're looking at high risk antisocial behaviors. But what's different with that is I'm not really working with the teen. I'm working with the parents, because like you were saying before, a lot of that comes down to parenting. And
Yeah.
so a lot of what we're doing is instilling, different parenting roles within that family system, and teaching supervision and rewards and consequences, and motivation and accountability, and a lot of those pieces, because that's what we see goes a long way. And that's what you mentioned earlier too, about getting involved in pro-social activities and sports. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years now.
Mate, that's amazing. Like, people, the general public don't hear of stories like that. You got, bikies that are at universities, they're academics. No one hears of that because they got this knucklehead sort of reputation that the media portrays them for. And that just blew me away, man. That's the first time I'd ever heard of that.
Yeah,
Um,
and like I said, one of the things that got me into it is there was other Mongols already doing it. So it was another part of that, positive role models that were within the club that really helped get my life on track. So, the narrative of, I joined a biker gang and got all these criminal charges and it ruined my life really isn't the case with me, because for me, it helped shape my life in a really positive way.
And I can imagine if your clubs your club was doing it, I imagine there'd be other people in other clubs and of similar nature doing similar things, and
Yeah,
that's that
absolutely. It's
thing.
not specific to the Mongols. There's a lot of, one percenters in the United States that, work in different academic fields, or have, or, are high up in unions, or have professional careers, or, work for law, law firms and stuff like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of very successful one percenters in the world that have
And if
meaningful and gainful employment.
so, if a young member, come into a club, the club would be encouraging of that person to chase academia.
Absolutely. I mean, if that's what their goals are, if that's what's going to make them a better member, because what's the alternative? We kind of wear them out, and they don't feel like they belong in this world, and they don't feel like they have a goal. And then they just, end up, those are the people that end up, going to prison or being addicted to substances or whatever. So, at the end of the day, what kind of brother are they going to, what are they going to bring to the table if they're unfulfilled in their life? And then what kind of brother are they going to be to the rest of us? So in reality, trying to build each other up, and, what's best for my brother is going to be the best for me too in the long run.
Yeah, good way of putting it. Let's talk about what the work you do now. So, what does that entail?
So now I'm a supervisor, so I don't carry a big caseload right now. I pretty much review treatment plans and, help market the program and find kids that are a good fit for the program. Um, but like I said, we work with teens that are 12 to 17. They have high, antisocial behaviors, or at high risk of being placed in either a juvenile facility or anywhere out of the home, whether it's foster care, whatever. And our main goal is to keep the youth in the home. And to have that goal, we really need to work with a lot with the caregivers, which sometimes are actual parents, sometimes it's, fictive kin or cousins or uncles and aunts. But our goal is to keep them united in the home and have a, more fulfilling home life, so that they're learning skills like we were saying before, whether it be parenting skills or just getting them into finishing school, getting them into some sort of trade, something that's going to be meaningful for them, that gives them goals and expectations.
I see that here, and I talk about I'm getting involved in working with troubled youth, and I say that if these kids felt safe at home, they wouldn't be out the street at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Absolutely. And, another big part of that too is parenting. A lot of parents don't know where their kids are at 2 in the morning. And if you don't know where your kid is, or you're not keeping an eye on them, what do you think they're going to do? I mean, we all remember when we were teenagers, right? And I can't believe it would be specific to me. If I wasn't supervised, I was probably doing some dumb shit.
Yeah.
So, and that's where, sports comes into play, or school and stuff like that, is because they're inherently, you're being supervised in these things. But really, a parent have an active role in their kid's life, and then teaching them, rewards and consequences. Yeah, you can go out with your friends, but I need to know who the parents are. I need the contact information when you're going to be home. It's a lot of, I think in this day and age, a lot of younger parents want to be their kid's friend instead of a parent. And the studies will show that the parents that were, more authoritative actually end up having better relationships down the road, because as an adult you realize that your parents cared about you, that they wanted what was best for you, and it might not click in your teenage years, but we all know it does when you get older. And so having that parent actively involved in the kid's life is what usually plays the biggest role, because like you said, unsupervised out at 2 a.m., but the real driver to that is that they're able to leave the house at 2 a.m. and parents don't know where they're at. So with the way that multi-systemic therapy works is, instead of saying how are you feeling or how does this make you feel, we look at what we call drivers, what's driving the behavior. So like, say for
Mm.
example, there's a kid that's smoking marijuana. Instead of saying, oh, it helps with anxiety, what I look at is, how is he able to smoke it? If he's, is he supervised? Where's he getting money to pay for it? Who does he buy it from? Is he hanging out with negative peers? What's the, I'll sequence his whole day and figure out, okay, what's the window of time where he's free to, to go out and smoke and nobody notice. If we come up with interventions along those lines, those are lasting interventions, because that's something that when I'm no longer in the home, the caregiver can keep doing without me. And that's the whole goal, is to empower the caregivers, empower the parents to learn these skills to do them when the social services are out of their home. Because I'm sure you've seen it too, but too many people get reliant on social services and
Mm.
feel like they can't do it without other people's help. And the
Well, that's
program I'm with,
intergenerational. You're
yeah,
seeing
and
second
that's
and
the
third
program.
generational.
Yeah, absolutely. And the program I'm with, the goal is to teach them how to do these things, so that when we're not in the home, they can do them on their own.
Like, I've done 23 years in prison, and one of the biggest things I say to people when they come out of prison, I say, get a job, get involved, get moving, be active. My goal is, I'm coming out for 7 years. I've been out of trouble for it's the longest ever. And my goal when I came out of prison was to work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for 2 years and then reassess. Now, if I would have worked at McDonald's or whatever, Hungry Jack's or whatever, I would have been all right. I would have even a minimum dollar, because I would have been that busy, I wouldn't have been spending money. And I say that to
Right.
people, and I say that to young kids. I say, it's the importance of getting into a job, getting into sport. Combine a job and sport, and you should be pretty much sweet. Whether it's a boxing
Absolutely.
club or whatever, wrestling club, whatever. If you can combine that, what sort of services are you involved in that you can provide these kids that are sort of going along? What's available in America? Because we often get taught, we get the impression that in America that there's no services available to these types of kids. We call ourselves the lucky country. Not that fucking lucky, let me tell you.
Yeah, no, honestly, we have a ton of their social services are really big here, especially for teens. I mean, it continues to get better, but especially for youth. But one of the big things is getting them involved in school, staying active in school. And there's a lot of new programs where actually it's punishable to the parents if their kids aren't going to school or truant. So now they're holding parents accountable to making sure their youth are going to school. And we say getting them involved in those pro-social activities, whether it's sports or debate club or chess club or whatever piques their interest. That's putting them around like-minded people. That's a more positive influence with similar goals and interests. To just like we said, when coming out of prison, sure, part of it is I want to be so busy that I can't get in trouble, right? And that's the same with kids. If they're going to school all day and then playing sports all night or in sort of club, there's just less time they can get in trouble. That's just factual. That's how it's going to be. But then the lessons you learn from that are the parts that actually shape who you are in the long term, right? That's what keeps you out of trouble, is learning those personal accountability pieces, and then having pride in what you're doing and having goals and setting goals and trying to accomplish them, seeing the rewards for those things versus seeing the consequences when you don't. So I think those are things that shape you in older years. But when you're younger, the biggest thing is just keeping them busy.
I relate to what you're saying so much, because I was that kid. I'd come home from boys' home, and in my case, there was like a lot of abuse going on in them boys' homes, and we lost kids. But the government is starting to look for lived experience. They're starting to realise a lot of the people they've had in the past, these government advisors and that, weren't worth a fucking two cents, right? Now, if I walk in a room, me, a troubled kid, I walk in a room and I see you, just the look of you, I'm listening to you. You've got lived
Yeah,
experience.
that's gone a
You're,
long. That's gone a long way, and that was one of my arguments early on. Is initially, you couldn't work in this field with a criminal record, and obviously some of them make sense, right? If you have crimes against youth or whatever, you're going to be a trusted member of society that's going to be alone with people. Obviously, you can't have those types of charges, but you have lived experience charges. You got in fights growing up, or whatever, those types of things. Visible tattoos, whatever. Those used to be, couldn't work in the field of visible tattoos either. But on that exactly what you're saying goes a long way. I don't, as a therapist, it's never my goal to tell kids that I know what they're going through or I can feel, because all of our experiences are different, right? And it's almost belittling their experience by saying, "Oh, I get it, I understand." But with the way I look and carry myself, from my lived experiences, I don't have to say these things. These teenagers can look at me and go, "Oh, he probably knows what I'm talking about, or he probably knows what this is like. He gets it." Versus
We see
you
it.
send
We
someone in
see
there
it.
with no life experience, and it's just not going to be helpful. I mean, there's a lot of studies that show, in order to be successful in therapy, you have to have that clinical rapport. And if there's no rapport built, it's not going to happen. And that's how rapport is easily, or not easily, but that's how rapport gets built, is by having, at least knowing that we have some sort of shared interest or shared experiences.
If I was a kid walking in, my walls would be dropped straight away as soon as I see it, because I'd see it in your eyes. I said, "This bloke knows me."
Yeah,
And that's how kids. That's how kids respond and they learn. If they feel as though you know them, they'll drop the walls and drop the bullshit, drop the ego, because they can't out ego you,
absolutely.
and they can't out ego me.
And
I go and do.
they're not impressing guys like us with tough guy stories or that macho stuff.
Yeah.
So that falls away pretty quick.
There's a thing called Brisbane Youth Detention Centre, and I was getting invited there to work with African gangs, which are, as I say, they're Australian-born African kids, but African gangs, and they had them in this specialised unit. And man, and some of the things, when you hear there's, like Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey's got a book out, What Happened to You? I think it's called. It's an interesting book, and it's addressing the underlying issue of why you're behaving like the way you do. And that's the bit I like to do. I like to peel back the onion when I work with these kids and say, okay, well, what happened to you? In a lot of the cases, these kids were extremely harassed by the police. And when they react, the police are going, look at you, look at you,
Yep.
look at you. You know
And
what I
then
mean?
there's that, then they don't trust law enforcement. There's that, lifetime of not trusting law enforcement because of past issues. And then that
Yeah.
obviously has inherent issues that come along with it.
And how do we rebuild that trust when that goes?
Man, that's going to be a tough one because, back in the day, and probably well before my era, but, back then law enforcement were more like social workers, right? They were the guy around town that everybody knew, and they knew the families, and they knew the parents, the parents' names, and they were actively involved in trying to do what was best for the community. And I think, policing's gone so far from that these days that I'm not
Yeah.
really sure how to bring it back with, for-profit prisons and, all these mandatory minimum sentencing, or like the crazy laws you guys have. It takes the personality out of it. They don't care why is the kid doing what he's doing. All they care about is here's what the punishment is. And
Yeah.
it's no longer, restorative in any way. It's just, punitive. It's just, go do your time and get out. And that's why we see all this recidivism. So I think the biggest change would be changing to a more restorative justice system where, in the United States, they got rid of a lot of the weight training equipment. They got rid of the schools and the books because they were saying, oh, they're going to prison and they're becoming super criminals. But in reality, what they were initially doing back then was learning a trade, finding hobbies or things they were into, and they were coming out with reasons to not reoffend. But if you're just crammed into a box and not taught new skills, you're likely to continue to reoffend. So I think culturally, no matter what country you're in, or at least from our two countries, things have really shifted away from that restorative piece. And it's just about punitive, like what can we do for maximum punishment?
Deterrent sentences. I got a deterrent sentence. When I was 16, I stole a Porsche from an affluent area, and I got a 12-month sentence, and he said, oh, it'll deter you from future reoffending. I called him Judge Nostradamus because he got it wrong, and
Right.
they housed me with the worst sex offenders in the state at the time. And that's the type of thing they do. They expose these kids to a lot of trauma with these deterrent sentences. They don't work. And I'm with you, brother. I'm with you, the restorative stuff about creating, what sort of things do we got to put in place for these kids not to go down that path? A lot of parents would look at you and say, what do you suggest? Like, I've got a 5-year-old kid. He doesn't like taking orders or anything like that. What sort of structure do we start with that kid now to sort of to ensure that he's not going to go down that path?
Well, I think early on is establishing the meaningful consequences and rewards, and just like for training a new pet versus a kid, rewards are going to be more heavily leaned on than consequences. Kids learn from rewards. So establishing that early on, if you do this behavior, here's what you get rewarded, but also that there's a consequence. So setting that structure up really early in life and being consistent. I also think one of the hardest parts between parents and kids is that a lot of times expectations aren't expressed. And so dad will be mad because, oh, kid didn't do the dishes, but he was never told to do the dishes. And then, oh, he should just know better. So I think, having those communication pieces about what are my expectations, and so that everyone's on the same page with what those expectations are, I think that goes a long way too. So a lot of it is just, being actively involved and communicating with your kid, but also, being an authority figure with your children and not just being their best friend.
And that's hard. That's hard. Like I know that's really hard for a lot of as you say, parents. Some people just want to be their kid's best friend.
We get that because you get that immediate gratification, right? But like I said, if you look at the studies or look at kids as they get older, who becomes more successful or who actually cares for their parents long term, it's the ones that have the stricter parents. And I'm not talking abusive strict, let's be realistic and keep it in the frame, but I'm saying that caring strict, where the kid can look back and say, my parents did this because they cared about me. That's what helps shape kids as they get older, and that's also what shows expectations. That's when you start having pride in what you're doing, because you see that's making your parents happy. Now your teachers are happy. You're getting those accolades, the pats on the back. I mean, even in a simple spec, like when you first started lifting weights and someone started saying, "Hey, you're getting bigger," that all boom, you're motivated to start lifting all the time, right? Because you're getting that pat on the back. And it's the same with kids, hey, I'm proud of you for doing well in school, or you're doing great at the sport or whatever. But just those really positive, encouraging words go a really long way.
I think they go a long way with adults too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I got told what a scumbag I was for 23 years by prison officers, and I'm out here now doing the work I do, and I constantly get little things like inspirational or whatever I get really good compliments, man. Because all of that stuff, a lot of these kids, like especially the ones who've been through traumatized, the antidote to trauma is love. You got to love people back out of that trauma. You got to. I know it was for me. That's what worked. I don't want to generalize, but that's what it works. I got love back to health. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I didn't
because
get
if not,
bashed.
you have walls up and you're guarded, and it's just like that abused dog that all of a sudden now snapping at everyone and is aggressive because it's constantly in fear, you're constantly in fight or flight, and if you built this monologue inside yourself that everyone's out to get you and you're constantly on the defensive, then you're going to act a certain way. But if you open up to love and someone cares for you and you're getting these positive messages and positive regard, not only now are you doing things for yourself, but you're doing things for other people because you like the way it's making you feel that you're pleasing others to that extent, in a positive manner.
Well, I say, when I get a compliment, I say, thank you for investing in my healing. You're so interesting, brother, and just what you're doing and what you've achieved with your life, and you know what I mean, it is amazing.
It, man. I would definitely be happy to do more stuff with you. I sent you a copy of my book. So I have a book out called The Ride of My Life. It's published here in the United States, but it's available from Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And it really, it shares my story on growing up and then getting into motorcycle clubs. And then it also shares with, me getting involved with my education and what I do for work now. And then, potentially or eventually leaving the club and building this, what we call the Lift Train Ride movement, which is, it's a lot of just ex-club guys that wanted to still have that camaraderie and brotherhood. So, it's the positive stuff. We work out or do jiu-jitsu together and ride motorcycles together and kind of peel away some of the stuff we didn't like. But, it's not as organized as club stuff. But anyways, it keeps me really active. And if your readers are interested to check out my book, that'd be awesome.
How do people follow you? What's your handle on Insta and are you on TikTok as well?
No, I'm just on Instagram is my main one. It's OG__Mooch. And honestly, I really pride myself in the fact that I try and reply to everyone that messages me. So, I'm obviously got to set some boundaries, but it needs some simple help or some advice, hit me up. I'm always happy to help. I have a lot of people that hit me up that ask about, is club life right for me, or here's a situation I'm in. And I'm always happy to shoot advice that way too. So, definitely look me up on social media, give me a follow, and hit me up anytime.
Give Chooch a follow. I encourage you people, and especially young fellas or young women or anything like that, are struggling with identity and that sort of thing. Oh, he's your man. This guy's got lived experience. I'll vouch for him all day long.
Thank you so much. Oh, yeah, and I also have a YouTube channel called Mondays with Mooch. I haven't been super active on it, but it's just me sharing my story. Sometimes I interview people that have done things with me, or, I was in a band growing up, so I've had like the singer to my old band. I've been on there, some of the guys from my old Skinhead days. So, I'm not super active on it, but I have some decent followers on there. So, get on there and check that out too.
Give him a follow, everyone. Get right behind Justin Mooch Deloretto. I love that. That sounds like a fucking movie star. That's a top name.
I appreciate it. I like it. Hopefully one day, right?
Thank you, Mooch, for being on the Stick Up podcast. Man, I love this, and I'll message you on Insta, and let's just keep in. I really want to stay in contact with you, brother. You're
Absolutely.
a fucking dead set asset
really
to this world.
Appreciate you having me on, and I really look forward to staying in touch and see what we can do together.
Mate, you're an asset. This bloke is an asset. This guy is someone that all parents should be following. Have a cracker of a day as I sign off.
Thanks, everybody.